Every night, while the human world turns off its lamps and pretends tomorrow's problems do not exist, another shift begins. A fly wedges itself beneath a leaf, a bee locks its jaws around a blade of grass. A mosquito settles on a wall with its legs folded and its antennae hanging low. The tiny body stops moving, the muscles loosen. The animal becomes so unresponsive that a light tap may barely register. It is not dead. It is sleeping. That sounds obvious now, but for most of scientific history, insects were treated like biological clockwork. They walked, flew, fed, mated, stung, escaped, and eventually became a stain on a windshield. Sleep seemed far too sophisticated for such small machinery. Mammals slept, birds slept. Creatures with large brains slept. Bugs merely powered down when nothing interesting was happening. Then fruit flies ruined the theory. In the year 2000, two independent research groups studied the common fruit fly, an animal best known for appearing 5 seconds after a banana becomes slightly emotional. The researchers could not attach ordinary human sleep equipment to a brain smaller than a grain of salt, so they used behavior instead. First, a sleeping fly had to remain motionless for a meaningful period. Second, it had to become harder to wake. Third, if researchers repeatedly disturbed its rest, it had to recover later by sleeping longer. A fly that only sat still would fail the final test. A real sleeper would build a debt. The fruit flies passed all three. After several minutes without movement, they became less responsive to light, vibration, and physical disturbance. When scientists kept them awake, the flies later collapsed into longer and deeper rest. The tiny animals were not simply inactive. They were regulating sleep. Then the experiments became suspiciously familiar. Caffeine kept the flies awake. Sedating antihistamines made them sleep. Young flies, deprived of rest, crashed harder afterward. Depending on age, sex, and conditions, fruit flies could spend roughly 8 to 12 hours a day asleep. Apparently, even an animal that eats fermenting fruit and walks on food still maintains a bedtime routine. Illness makes the connection even stranger. When fruit flies become infected, a gene called Namuri becomes active. The name comes from the Japanese word for sleep. Once switched on, it helps push the fly into extended rest, sometimes for most of the day. That extra sleep supports recovery. A feverish human body does something similar. Energy is redirected. Movement becomes irritating. The bed suddenly develops the gravitational pull of a small moon. Sleep is not merely lost time. It is part of the repair system. But fruit flies are already complicated compared with some sleepers. Consider Cassiopea elegans, a transparent roundworm with exactly 959 body cells in the adult hermaphrodite and only 302 neurons. There is no proper brain in the human sense, yet the worm enters a sleep-like state. It becomes still, less responsive, and later compensates when rest is interrupted. Research has also shown that this sleep helps the worm stabilize memories. That is an awkward result for anyone insisting that sleep exists only to service a large, intelligent brain. The worm has fewer neurons than some group chats have unread messages, yet it still needs rest to make learning stick. Then biology removes the brain entirely. Cassiopea, the upside-down jellyfish, has no centralized brain. Its nervous system is spread through a loose network. At night, its pulsing slows. Its reactions weaken. When researchers repeatedly disturbed it with jets of water, the jellyfish became sluggish the following day and increased its rest. A brainless animal became sleep-deprived. That pushes the mystery much deeper. If sleep existed only to organize thoughts, a jellyfish should have nothing to organize. There are no taxes, no memories of embarrassing conversations, and no plans for retirement. Still, the animal shuts down. Sea anemones have added another clue. While nerve cells remain active, ordinary cellular damage gradually accumulates. Rest appears to create a window for repair. That suggests sleep may be older than centralized brains, possibly reaching back more than 600 million years to early animals with simple nerve nets. The brain may not have invented sleep. The brain may have inherited it. Once that idea is accepted, insect behavior starts looking less mechanical and much more fragile. Honeybees provide the best example. A foraging bee that finds flowers does not simply return to the hive and scream and bee. It performs the waggle dance, a coded movement that tells other workers the direction and distance of the food. The angle of the dance corresponds to the position of the sun. The duration communicates distance. One badly delivered dance can send the workforce on a useless flight toward absolutely nothing. In 2010, researchers kept honeybees awake through the night and then watched their dances. The exhausted bees still performed, but their signals became less precise. The angle wandered, the directional information grew unreliable. A well-rested bee produced a useful map. A sleep-deprived bee produced the insect equivalent of directions from a confused uncle. Humans lose verbal accuracy when tired. Words become sloppy. Sentences drift. The brain begins taking scenic routes through simple ideas. A bee has only one formal language, and sleep loss damages that language too. Sleep also changes memory. In a 2015 experiment, bees learned to associate a particular odor with a lesson. During deep sleep, researchers exposed some of them to the same smell. Those bees remembered the training better the next day. Presenting the odor while they were awake did not produce the same effect, and unrelated smells did not help. The simplest explanation is that sleep supports memory processing in bees, much as it does in mammals. A cue linked to the day's learning may reactivate the stored experience while the animal rests. This does not prove that bees dream of endless flower fields and a world without beekeepers. Dreaming is much harder to demonstrate. No bee can wake up and describe a nightmare about an enormous rolled newspaper. Still, the sleeping insect brain is not always quiet. Fruit flies show at least two distinct sleep phases. One is relatively still. The other includes patterns of brain activity that resemble an active state. It is tempting to compare this with rapid eye movement sleep in humans, although insects have no eyelids and the match is not exact. The careful conclusion is not that flies definitely dream. The careful conclusion is that insect sleep has internal stages, and some of those stages may involve active neural processing. Age changes the pattern as well. Young bees tend to sleep in shorter, scattered episodes. Older foragers often settle into longer nighttime rest. Their daily work is more demanding. Their schedules are tied to daylight, and their worn bodies appear to need consolidated recovery. Even the sleeping positions look oddly peaceful. Some bees grip grass stems with their jaws so the wind cannot carry them away. Several may cluster together on one plant. Bumblebees sometimes crawl deep into flowers before sunset. As the petals close, the bee remains tucked inside until morning, covered in pollen like an exhausted employee asleep at the office. People regularly mistake these resting bees for dead ones. A gentle disturbance may produce a slow leg movement, a body shake, and an irritated departure. The bee was not dying. It was having the worst possible alarm clock. Mosquitoes also pay for missed sleep. In a 2022 study, researchers repeatedly disturbed mosquitoes during their normal rest period. Later, they offered access to a warm host and a blood meal. Well-rested mosquitoes readily approached. Sleep-deprived mosquitoes were far less interested. This is remarkable because female mosquitoes need blood to develop eggs. Feeding is not a casual hobby. It is central to reproduction. Yet, an exhausted mosquito may ignore the meal and prioritize rest. So a mosquito that buzzes around a room without biting may not be showing mercy. It may simply be too tired to complete the assignment. Sleep affects insects because it is not optional. The most disturbing evidence came from experiments on fruit flies published in 2020. Researchers prevented the flies from sleeping for long periods. The animals deteriorated and died far earlier than normal. Under relentless deprivation, all of the severely affected flies were dead by around day 20. The expected culprit was the brain. It was not. When scientists examined the flies, the most dramatic damage appeared in the gut. Reactive oxygen species had accumulated inside the intestines. These unstable molecules can damage proteins, cell membranes, and DNA. In moderate amounts, they are part of normal biology. In excess, they become chemically destructive. The sleepless flies were being poisoned from inside their own digestive systems. Then came the twist. When researchers gave the flies antioxidants that neutralized the reactive molecules, survival improved dramatically. Some flies lived close to a normal lifespan despite extreme sleep loss. The result did not make sleep unnecessary. Sleep deprivation still causes broad problems, and antioxidants are not a magical replacement for rest. But the experiment showed that death was not caused by one exhausted brain simply switching off. A lethal chain reaction was building elsewhere in the body. Similar oxidative changes appeared in sleep-deprived mice, suggesting the gut may be part of a much older sleep maintenance system shared across animals. For a fruit fly, staying awake is not heroic productivity. It is slowly turning the intestine into a chemical accident. Modern light adds another threat. Insects evolved under reliable cycles. Day brought heat, movement, feeding, and navigation. Night brought darkness and rest. Artificial light breaks that schedule. A 2024 study exposed honeybees to constant illumination. Their internal rhythms became disrupted. They slept less, and their waggle dances became less accurate. The damage did not remain inside one tired bee. Because the dance guides other workers, poor sleep threatened communication across the colony. Streetlights, buildings, vehicles, greenhouses, and illuminated gardens now brighten large areas that were once dark. For nocturnal insects, artificial light can trap attention and interfere with feeding, mating, migration, and escape. For daytime species, light at night can blur the boundary between activity and rest. A lamp does not need to kill an insect directly to harm it. Sometimes it only needs to keep the animal awake. There is an important limit to all of this. Scientists can measure posture, movement, responsiveness, rebound sleep, gene activity, and neural patterns. They cannot directly measure the private experience of an insect. A bee resting inside a flower may be asleep, cold, conserving energy, or waiting for better weather. A motionless fly is not automatically dreaming. Claims about insect dreams remain suggestive, not proven. But the basic case for sleep is solid. Flies sleep. Bees sleep. Mosquitoes sleep. Cockroaches enter daily rest states. Worms sleep. Jellyfish sleep. Even animals without centralized brains display the same basic pattern. Activity declines, responsiveness drops, missed rest creates compensation, and prolonged deprivation causes damage. This behavior creates an evolutionary problem. Sleep is dangerous. A sleeping animal stops feeding. It stops searching for mates. It stops watching for predators. It becomes slower to respond and easier to kill. For a small insect surrounded by birds, spiders, frogs, bats, and other insects, going unconscious is an outrageous gamble. Natural selection should have removed sleep if sleep were merely convenient. Instead, evolution preserved it across hundreds of millions of years. That means the cost of staying awake is even worse than the risk of becoming helpless. Every night, a bee folds its legs and gives up control. A fly lowers its antennae. A butterfly hangs beneath a leaf. A mosquito rests on a wall only a few centimeters from a hand capable of ending its entire bloodline. For several hours, each animal chooses repair over awareness. Not consciously, of course. There is no tiny manager inside the bee approving the sleep schedule. The command is older than decision-making. It is written into cells, nerves, hormones, and genes. Sleep was already operating before animals had complex thoughts, before language, before memory looked anything like human memory, possibly before brains existed at all. So the smallest creature in the room is not a tireless machine. It carries fatigue. It accumulates sleep debt. Its communication fails when rest is stolen. Its memory weakens. Its immune system changes. Its cells collect damage. Push the deprivation far enough, and the animal dies. The fly and the human reach the modern world through very different evolutionary roads, yet both still obey the same ancient rule. Eventually, every nervous system must go quiet, even the one currently walking across the ceiling.